Hello viewers, welcome to Study with Master Notes again. So I am very happy you are liking, sharing and subscribing my channel. So I request you to please push the bell icon so that you will get the earliest notification of my new upcoming videos which will be helpful to your Ignou exam and all university exams and NET exams also. So today I will discuss A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, Unit 5. So here it is the British novel and MEC 3 is the subject code. So we will go critical perspectives, a brief selective overview. Okay. So we will go, here it is the structure, objectives, introduction, early critical reception, subsequent criticism, the advantages of a psychoanalytic approach to a portrait. Let us sum up a selected bibliography. So unit 4, that is techniques in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Already I have covered the technique, that is unit 4. So you will go through my previous videos in the description box. Always I put the videos so you will get the notification. So here it is the critical perspectives. So here it is the objective. So every unit has its own objective, already I told. So here it is the objective. So what is the objective of this unit? In this unit we shall look at the criticism related to a portrait, first in terms of its immediate critical reception and then in terms of criticism from the 40s onward. We shall also see how one recent approach, the psychoanalytic approach, is likely to prove more fruitful with this novel. Okay, so we will go, here it is a criticism, a portrait first in terms of its immediate critical reception and then in terms of criticism from the 40s onward. Okay, so here it is a psychoanalytical approach. So here it is the introduction. In terms of its critical reception, a portrait has had its share of detractors and its admirers. Foremost among those attacking the novel are those who see it as an artistic failure, an account of Joyce's inability to properly handle point of view. This belief that Joyce has failed to consistently manage his distance from Stephen. So here it is the Joyce failure in account of inability to properly handle point of view. Okay, so they believe that Joyce has failed to consistently manage his distance from Stephen. Those who see the novel as an artistic success believe that the problem of distance has been handled quite well by Joyce in A Portrait. More recent approaches have by and large stopped seeing the distance problem as all that important. Early critical reception, here it is a 5.2. What is the early critical reception? A number of its early reviewers saw A Portrait as a seriously flawed book. They saw in it lack of organization. So early reviewers say A Portrait is a seriously flawed book. They saw in it lack of organization. So no systematization or organization is there. Some had problems with what they saw as its prudent realism and its frankness about physicality. Some saw the discussion of aesthetics and the sermons as not fully integrated into the organic structure of the novel. Some saw Joyce as a realist but thought that his method was too chaotic to produce the effect of realism. Okay, so some saw the discussion of aesthetics and the sermons as not fully integrated and the organic structure of the novel. Some saw Joyce as a realist but thought that his method was too chaotic to produce the effect of realism. So no realism is there. Here it is a portrait. Quite a few people saw positive merit in A Portrait. The poet Hat Crane found it spiritually inspiring. Okay, so here it is the main key point. The poet Hat Crane found it spiritually inspiring. Here it is the good sign, that is the positive merit in A Portrait. H.G. Wells saw it as by far the most living and convincing picture that exists of an Irish Catholic upbringing. Okay, so H.G. Wells saw it as a by far the most living and convincing picture that exists of an Irish Catholic upbringing. So here is the Christian mythology and Irish Catholic upbringing. Here is the nation 24th February 1917 H.G. Wells saw. Then Francis Hackett in a review in New February 10 number 122 3rd March 1917 saw a portrait as not entirely pleasant but thought it as beauty, such love of beauty, such intensity of feeling, such pathos, such candor, it goes beyond anything in English that reveals the inevitable malaise of serious youth. John Massey in a review in Dial 92 number 744 14 June 1917 thought a portrait was outspoken, vigorous, original and beautiful. So here it is a main key point you can note down. H.G. Wells and another name is Francis Hackett. Okay, so here it is the main key point you can note down. One is H.G. Wells, another is Francis Hackett. In a review in New February, portrait as the entire pleasant but thought it as the beauty, such love beauty. And John Massey in a review in Dial 92 number 744 thought a portrait was outspoken, vigorous, original and beautiful. Okay. Then we will go subsequent criticism. The broad division in subsequent criticism of a portrait has been between those like Hugh Kenner and Wayne Booth on the one hand who attacked the novel on some counts and those on the other hand who are quite enamored of it. Both Booth and Kenner failed to appreciate fully the novelty of Joyce's effort. Okay, so the broad division in subsequent criticism of a portrait has been between those like Hugh Kenner and Wayne Booth on the one hand who attacked the novel on some counts and those on the other hand who were quite enamored of it. Both Booth and Kenner failed to appreciate fully the novelty of Joyce's effort. Kenner believes that the vagueness we come across in a portrait regarding Joyce's precise attitude to Stephen is calculated and that this vagueness answers the imperatives of a nearly solistic novel. Okay, so Kenner believes that the vagueness we come across in a portrait regarding Joyce's precise attitude to Stephen. So here it is the main key point you can note down. Kenner believes that the vagueness or nullness we come across in a portrait regarding Joyce's precise attitude to Stephen. Okay, then we will go in a portrait regarding Joyce's precise attitude to Stephen is calculated that this vagueness answers these imperatives of a nearly solistic novel. Booth thinks that Joyce fails in properly managing the problem of distance. So here it is a main key point, Kenner and Booth. So Booth thinks that Joyce fails in properly manage the problem of distance. Okay, so Booth thinks that Joyce fails in properly manage the problem of distance. Here it is the main key point. Then both this criticism are simplistic in that they fail to take into account Joyce's modernism, his handling of the mastery of a multiple perspective and his subtle modulation of tone and attitude. As an answer to the both Kenner approach, those sympathetic to Joyce's method take the position that a portrait use at least a dual consciousness. One part of the duality is that which from Stephen's point of view enables Joyce to capture the intimacy of a first-person narrator, recording and observing, experiencing at different levels, ages and sensitivities. The other part of duality from the point of view of the mature narrator allows Joyce to retain legitimate control of the form and to comment indirectly on the subject matter. Harry Levin's 1941 book James Joyce, A Critical Introduction, is in the forefront of sympathetic treatments of a portrait. Some of the major points Levin makes are: here, Harry Levin's 1941 books, James Joyce, A Critical Introduction. Okay, the Stephen we finally meet is more sharply differentiated from his surroundings than the figure Joyce set out to describe. Joyce's notable contribution to English prose is to provide a more fluid medium for refracting sensations and impressions through the author's mind to facilitate the transition from photographic realism to aesthetic impressions. Joyce's use of conversation is one of the most vital elements of the Joyce writing. Who said this? Harry Levin's 1941 book, James Joyce. James Atherton's introduction to his edition of a portrait for the Heinemann modern novel series in 1964 in another good example of criticism. Okay, another good criticism is James Atherton's introduction to his edition of a portrait. So here it is the main key point you can note down. James Atherton's introduction to his edition of a portrait, Heinemann, modern novel series 1964 is another example of good criticism that is sympathetic to Joyce's overall achievement. The most remarkable thing Atherton's introduction does is to draw attention to cinematic elements in Joyce's narrative technique in a portrait. Seeing a portrait in the light of technical and stylistic innovations initiated by modernism is a big help in arriving at a sympathetic view of the novel. Most books on Joyce that appeared before post-structuralism came on the scene around 1966 are informed by the modernism sympathetic attitude. Colin McCabe's 1979 book James Joyce and the Revolution of the World was the first full-length attempt to see Joyce's writings from a post-structuralist perspective. Here it is the main key point, Colin McCabe's. Okay, so you should remember Colin McCabe's 1979 book, James Joyce and Revolution of the World. John Paul Rickle and Maud Illeman are other notable critics who have brought a broadly post-structuralist perspective to bear on Joyce's works. The broad shift brought about by post-structuralist perspectives collectively is to orient Joyce's criticism towards questions related to identity, naming, and patriarchy largely in the light of theories brought into currency by the work of French psychoanalytic thinker Jacques Lacan. So here it is the main key point, that is patriarchal, naming and identity, which is described by psychoanalytic thinker Jacques Lacan. But then literary theory in relative terms has paid much more attention to Ulysses and to Finnegan's Wake than to a portrait. Those two novels provide much more fertile ground for many of the more recent critical trends. In the wake of the relative falling out of favor of the new critics in particular and of formalism of various kinds in general, a taste like a portrait has suffered some relative neglect, but for anybody seriously interested in the formative stages of early English language modernism and for those interested in fiction writing as a craft, it remains a virtual goldmine. Only when a reader approaches this novel in a spirit of appreciating modernism in general is he or she able to fully realize the reach and full impact of the remarkable things Joyce did with language in his novel and the extraordinary economy and compression and radiance with which he was able to do that. If on the other hand ideology and gender related issues make a reader hostile to everything modernistic, then part of the holistic gets transferred to the reading act itself, but that is seen by many as an affordable loss in this period of reader empowerment. At the same time, we should not forget that some of the ideological and feminist reading are quite likely to go against the grain of this novel. The approach that is likely to work best with this quintessentially modernistic novel is one combining close stylistic and formal analysis with psychoanalytic insights of the kind provided by the theories of Jacques Lacan. One such extremely useful insight is tying of selfhood with the unconscious. The idea of the self as a stable amalgam of consciousness is soon to be replaced in Lacan by seeing novelistic characters as assemblages of signifiers clustering around a proper name. It is in areas related to growing and acquiring identity and to otherness that to Lacanian theory are most relevant for our present purposes. So here it is the main key point. Lacanian theories are the most relevant for our present purposes. One of the Lacan's most important tests is the insistence of the latter in the unconscious. One question Lacan poses in the essay Anthologist by David Laws in his 1988 Modern Criticism and Theory or Reader is, then who is this other to whom I am more attached than to myself, since at the heart of my own assent to my own identity it is still he who works me. Laws page 102. Then who is this other to whom I am more attached than to myself, since at the heart of my own assent to my own identity it is still he who works me. In the same essay, Lacan insists that the Freudian discovery of the unconsciousness be followed through its logical conclusion, which is the self-radical eccentricity to itself. Laws page number 101. Stephen too is preoccupied with otherness, and the nature of the Stephen's existence and the shape of his character always depends on the other end of his thinking. Personality seen from this viewpoint is not something static but a succession of phases. Because the different modes of Stephen's thought react to his environment, the arrangement of the overall structure is already an arrangement of technique, as different situations entail different rhythms and modes of thought. Each chapter in the novel tries to offer a coherent image of Stephen, but the real focus is on the moment, which involves the shift between the moment of stasis at which perception fixes on epiphanies at the end of his narrative unit. The distant attitude that Joyce has towards Stephen early in each unit corresponds to the naturalist view of the figure trapped by his social system. And yet each chapter ends with a sense of passing through or passing on, and Stephen achieves a transcendence at each such point that brings him close to Joyce. The cycle of Stephen's progress in a portrait are rites of sundering and reconciliation. The word sundering is extremely important in a portrait because in the psychoanalytic approach the sundering is tied up with lack and desire. Okay, so here it is the main key point you can note down. In a portrait, the cycles of Stephen's progress in a portrait are rites of sundering and reconciliation. The word sundering is extremely important in a portrait because in the psychoanalytic approach, and sundering is tied up with lack and desire. Scene 4. Stephen comes to be an activity through which he develops himself by being shaken loose from an established context so that he can gain entry into a realm of semiotic shifting that expands his range of linguistic structuring. Okay, so Stephen comes to an activity through which he develops himself by being shaken loose from an established context so that he can gain entry into a realm of semiotic shifting that expands his range of linguistic structuring. Shaped by the self that he is yet to become, Stephen at 14 or 15 already begins to understand the process by which he is creating that self. The movement toward clarification of his own self in Stephen's case comes about through expanding into language. The movement toward clarification of his own self in Stephen's case comes about through expanding into language. A sense of separation and loss expands Stephen's language in the action of each chapter. His mind at the same moves back and forth between an attractive maternal image and a threatening paternal one. Whenever he settles into a somewhat stable relationship with his maternally oriented environment, he perceives a male figure as threatening his stability. His usual reaction is to set off in a new direction to find a new world involving a transformed maternity or shifting of language. The shifting expands his perception into a new world of images. These images not only become a new wing of his mental development, they in fact constitute him as a new person. Seen from this angle, the linguistic flow, imaged as moving, liquid, or material embrace at the end of each cycle, gives Stephen a new enhanced potential for language. Contact with maternal flocks has a way of energizing Stephen at crucial points in the text. The characteristic mode of Stephen's involvement with the world is complex. A very interesting aspect of the vision Stephen has of himself as an artist is that by projecting himself outward as a narrator, he generates a creative power that returns to expand the mind that sent it. Insofar as he creates his object by shaping his story, he creates himself. This kind of psychoanalytic line on Joyce's works as a whole is spelled out quietly well by Sheldon Breivik in his 1991 book The Veil of Science. Okay, so here it is the main key point, that is the kind of psychoanalytic line on Joyce's works whole is spelled out quite well by Sheldon Breivik in 1991 The Veil of Science, reference to which has already been made elsewhere in this unit. My summary of Breivik's argument regarding a portrait is a little simplistic, but it is sure to go some way in indicating to you how such a broad approach helps considerably, especially in the case of an identity-oriented and language-oriented novel as a portrait is. Most other current approaches have in them the potential of being either a misreading or an overreading or a reading against the grain of the novel. In any case, a very large part of feminist criticism is informed by Lacanian insights to such a remarkable degree that the Lacanian approach is bound to be a more comprehensive one. As readers, you are free to go in for any kind of reading which would be more in keeping with your own ideological or readerly preferences. The taste that you then create will be your taste in keeping with the reader response notion that a taste gets created only in the process of reading. This could be quite subjective. That subjectivity also needs to be checked through conventions of reading or through protocols of reading. To succeed better with Joyce's novel, you need to be aware of the technical side of the modernist enterprise as a whole, which some idea of imaging symbolism, modernism. You also need some minimum awareness of some latter development like post-structuralism. Finally, you need to come a portrait with a relatively open mind. Then it will be easier to understand the full implications of the kind of glowing tribute that Derek attributes space to Joyce. Far more people read Joyce than are aware of it, such as the impact of his literary revolution that few later novelists of importance in any of the world languages have escaped its aftershock, even when they attempt to avoid Joycean paradigms and procedures. We are indirectly reading Joyce, therefore, in many of our engagements with the past half century's serious fiction, and the same is true of some not so serious fiction too. In television and video, film, popular music, and advertising, all of which are marked as modern genres by the use of Joycean techniques of parody and spastic self-referentiality, fragmentation of word and image, open-ended narrative, and multiple point of view, and the unprecedented explicitness with which Joyce introduced the trivial details of ordinary life into the realm of art opened up a rich new territory for writers, painters, and filmmakers, while at the same time it revealed the fruitful contradictions at the heart of the realist enterprise itself. Derek attributes the Cambridge Companion to James Joyce, page 1. Then let us sum up. In this final unit of our study material of portrait, we have briefly looked at some of the critical responses that the novel generated upon publication and subsequently over the years. Joyce's criticism has become something of an industry as generations of readers try to unravel the complexities of the writer's mind and his technical virtuosity. While this book deals with some of the basics of a portrait, it is meant to lead you onto a more extensive and intensive reading of other available critical material for a more incisive understanding of Joyce's novel. Then we will go a select bibliography. Here it is the bibliography books names. That is Richard Ellman, James Joyce, Oxford University Press, John Cross Joyce, Christopher Hanson. So here it is the unit 5 already I have covered. Okay. So thank you viewers. Please like, share and subscribe my channel and push the bell icon so that you will get earliest notification. So thank you again all my viewers. Hope have a nice day. Thank you.